Hi, Bob. Welcome to Terry's Doing It. It's really nice to have you on here.
Thanks, Terry. Good to see you.
The first thing I have to ask you before we even get started, I showed the picture of you taking a photograph in Monterey with the wave behind. What were you thinking?
I was thinking I don't want to get wet.
Did you? Did you get wet?
No, well, spray. There's a lot of spray.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable around water. I'm a mountain person.
Mm.
I like dry land.
Well, it's a beautiful photograph, but it does, given the king tides that are happening on the coast lately, it just makes me very concerned for you.
Well, I'm always concerned being around water like that. I'm a dreadful sailor. I
Oh,
get horribly seasick.
yikes.
Um, I'm just not comfortable with water at all.
Yeah. Well, so Bob, we met at the Travel Writers and Photographers Conference in Corte Madera. I think it's quite rightfully called one of the premier travel writing conferences. I don't know, in the United States, in the world. What do you think?
Well, it's always right to be one of the best in the world, but
Yeah. Yeah.
we like to think that.
Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
certainly in the States,
Sure. Well,
We've had, the faculty has been remarkable.
Yeah, I've went to learn to be a travel writer. I've written for a lot of years, but I think I've gone now to 5. But you, I understand, something like what, 34?
Yeah, I started the photography element of the conference 32 years ago, I think it is. I
Mm,
think this year is my 32nd year as co-chair.
wow. Well, I invariably go for the writers modules, but this year I went to San Francisco with you and your business partner, Andrea Johnson, and because I wanted to learn to see the way that you see. And it was a fabulous opportunity to take permission. You gave me permission to be less rigid and structured about how I photographed. And I appreciated that. It was great fun.
Good.
I don't know what you know about Terry's Doing It, but this is my attempt to bring on people who have stepped outside of their comfort zone to pursue their passions in hopes that people who may want to do the same but are hesitant, they're intimidated for any number of reasons, but I want to inspire them to go ahead and do it. So you certainly have been one who has stepped out and done things differently than most. And I think you have a lot to share and a lot to encourage people with. So that's why you're on here uh, today. And you've been very generous with your time in agreeing to speak to people. I'd like to start us off with some perspective so that aside from the things that I shared in the intro, people understand who we're talking to. David Elliott Cohen, who was an author and editor of 70 photography books. He may still be alive. I don't know. He was a co creator of A Day in the Life series that we all remember. He said about you that you're kind of like Meryl Streep. And when there's an award show, everybody's basically competing for second place. How does that feel?
It feels I should be wearing a dress.
And have more
I,
hair?
do, I don't take, hair would help.
Although she's
Uh,
thinning. She is thinning these days.
yeah, I think the best analogy to Meryl Streep is that Meryl Streep is like a blank canvas and she creates characters on that canvas. And I think I'm a bit the same way. I find things that I create as photographs without having any idea of what I'm doing, basically.
That's a good analogy.
The
So,
awards thing is I never take seriously because it's meaningless.
well,
It's,
so
it's it's very subjective.
let's put it into context. 5 times the Society of American Travel Writers have given you the Travel Photographer of the Year award, most recently in 2015. In 2016, you were given the Errázuriz Wine Photographer of the Year award out of 7,000 submissions from 60 countries. So that's not nothing.
No, it's never nothing. No, I'm not saying it's not nothing. It's great for your ego, I guess, but you can't take it seriously. I remember one year, um, there's another great travel photographer, Bob Christ, who's a friend of mine who was a long-time geographic photographer. Bob and I both submitted work for an award that we both expected to get. We both thought we'd put really strong portfolios in. And Bob told me this later because I didn't see his portfolio. He didn't see mine, but I was talking to him about it. And neither of us even got a mention.
Mm.
We didn't even get an honorable mention. We got nothing, nothing at all. And it comes down to the people that are judging them and giving the awards.
True.
So it doesn't really mean anything. If you get it, that's just lucky. But you can't, just bottom line is you can't take it seriously. Now, I've had friends that are so upset if they don't get an award, they become totally distracted by it to their detriment. I remember one person posting Facebook posts asking them what everybody thought if the judges had made a mistake. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, so
Yeah.
your editor, I think he was your editor, David Cohen, said he could send you anywhere in the world and you would invariably return with, he called them spectacular, soulful, memorable images. Always, every time. What are some of the places he sent you?
Um, Turkey, not Turkey. I just came back from Turkey. One of those tea countries, Thailand,
Thailand.
Thailand, Africa, Israel a couple of times. We did a book on Jerusalem, Las Vegas, of all places.
He
Then what
kept
else
you
was it?
busy.
But yeah, a few places.
Well, John Agnoni, formerly
John
with National, tell me again.
Agnon.
Agnon.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. He was formerly with National Geographic. I don't know if he still is. There are a lot of
No,
people formerly with National
no one.
Geographic these days.
No
Yeah.
one has
Yeah.
been in traffic now more than a couple of years, I
Oh
think.
my gosh. Well, he
It's all
wrote
fun.
in your book passages that the way you approach your subjects is as a journalist. Um, and that your most powerful piece of equipment is not your camera, not, any of the equipment you use, but your brain. That people can come to the same scene and see very different things, but that you excel when you walk into a new situation. You see the light in a different way and you use the light effectively as a way of communication. Photography is a language of its own, he said, and Bob is fluent. So I want to spend a little time listening to the language of some photographs that you shared with me. First of all, you've got a man walking down stone stairs, and you talk about setting up the opportunity for photos so that when the conditions are right, it captures what it is that you wanted to capture. How did you set this up, and what was your thought process?
I don't set photographs up. That isn't how I work. First of all, any photographer has to be fully conversant with his equipment. That's fundamental. Your equipment has to be part of you. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a $5,000 camera or a smartphone. You have to know it, and you have to know how it will record the scene in front of it. You obviously have to know how to use it technically. That goes without saying. Beyond that, you have to know about light. You have to be able to analyze what. None of this is really a thought process, it's intuitive. You have to learn to know light well enough that you immediately respond to light in certain conditions. When you see, so you're looking at you now, Terry, and see the light hitting your nose. and that shows me where the light is coming from. And I'm looking at that kind of thing all the time. As you notice, I've arranged my lights so that it doesn't hit my nose,
Hmm.
so it doesn't look anywhere near as big as it really is. This is
Wait a
very
minute.
deliberate.
Wait
It's
a
very
minute.
deliberate. Yours must be enormous, enormous, Terry. But seriously, I'm always looking at light, not always consciously. Uh, yeah, I'm always very aware of what I'm looking. One of my daughters is always criticizing me for staring at people, but it's what I do. That's what I do for a living. Okay. Yeah, I'm always looking intently at everything. And I try to be in a state where I have I won't say a blank mind, but completely open mind. And I let the image impress itself on me rather than me searching out the image. And as a photographer I really greatly respect and who I've worked with on projects, Alex Webb. Anyone that's seriously interested in photography should look at his work. This WEBB. Alex's work is phenomenal. His major book is called The Suffering of Light. It's very complex, very well seen. But Alex describes the process of smelling a photograph. He can sniff a photograph out. He can smell when there's something potentially there. And this photograph you're referring to of the man coming down the steps at the monastery in Bhutan is that kind of situation. When I saw it, I loved the geometry of the architecture. I could tell there was a potential for a photograph there. But one of the important things about most photographs is that they need what I call punctuation. And this shot was nothing without the punctuation. And the punctuation was a monk that was coming down the steps. And I just waited until he got in the right position, clicked the shutter, and that made the shot. I waited probably not more than 10 minutes for that to happen. But you have to be patient. It's very difficult taking photographs with other people because you always feel that you're holding them back.
Yeah.
It's a very solitary profession.
Yeah.
And I like the freedom to wait in a place for half an hour if I have to. And you can't expect other people to do that. So you really have to be on your own.
Sure. Ansel Adams. This photograph shows you in his living room and him looking very in a very friendly way to you.
It just had
Not
a
what I would
martini.
expect. Yeah.
It had a,
How'd that happen?
this is a martini.
Is that what it was?
It's too big. Now, Ansel was an extremely outgoing person. He was a big hand. He loved entertaining. He loved an audience. And every night, I spent 2 weeks with him the first time I came to California. And every night, a different person would be at the door at 5 o'clock, and he would invite them in until 6 o'clock. He'd spend an hour with them, and he'd sit in that chair that he's in with his martini and tell stories that the first time were really interesting, the second time less so. And after he spent 2 weeks there and heard it for the 14th time, he just wanted to just get on with it, Ansel. But he told the same stories every time. And he loved doing it. Yeah, and the people that went to see him, he was listed in the Monterey phone book. Anybody could have gone to see him. He was just listed there, Ansel Adams. And his address was there. It's, up at just at the top above Big Sur when you drive up towards past Point Lobos, going up the road from Carmel to Big Sur. And he was a very engaging, entertaining, sociable person. Very warm, friendly.
Well, it's pretty remarkable. You told me that at this point in your relationship, he hadn't seen a single photo that you'd taken.
No, he hadn't.
It sounds kind of like anybody could have walked into his house, and maybe so, but how did you meet him? How did you end up photographing him?
I've always been a photographer, although I didn't start making my living from photography until I was 35. And even then, I wasn't making a living at it, but it was my sole source of income. In those early days, I was very involved in a lot of photography groups in England. And photography in the early 70s, fully accepted in England. It was a minor art form. It wasn't at the level it is in America. But the Royal Photographic Society, of which I was a member and was given an award by in those early years, one of the first awards I ever got, invited Ansel over to give a lecture. I went down to London to hear him, and we met and spent some time talking. And at the end, he said, this sort of frequent casual line, if you're ever in California, call me and come down and visit. And so the following year, I visited California, called him, went down to see him, and spent the next 2 weeks with him. Every night, it wasn't intentional. I was on my way to Yosemite to go climbing, but he wouldn't let me leave. He'd invite someone up, new over every night. Edward Weston's daughter-in-law, Maggie Weston, came over one night. The leader of the Boston Philharmonic came over one night. This whole series of people very involved in the arts in the Carmel area. And as I say, I couldn't get away. And I kept this relationship up with Ansel. And in fact, I had dinner with him a month before he died. It was the
Wow.
last time I saw him.
So, your knowing Ansel was responsible actually for opening doors to get into pitch darkroom photography and National Geographic?
People think that knowing Ansel opened a lot of doors photographically, and it didn't directly at all, because we're in different worlds. For one thing, Ansel never saw any of my photographs.
Never.
Never. No.
Wow.
Well, he did. The photographs he saw uh, were much later on, and they were more documentary photographs, and they were of him, as you'll hear in a second. But he never saw any of my work. We were just connected on mountains because
Hmm.
I'd been on several Himalayan expeditions. And Ansel had always wanted to visit the Himalaya and never had.
Interesting.
So that was our basis for connection. But we worked in different areas. He's a fine art photographer. He was a commercial photographer when he was much younger, but obviously when I met him, he was already relatively old and made his living from selling prints. And I was working in commercial photography.
Hmm.
So we didn't connect on that level. But because I knew him, I was desperate for work when I moved to California in 79. Really tough. In fact, one art director I went to see said, you may as well go home. We've got more photographers than we know what to do with in San Francisco. That you're wasting your time. He literally said that to me. And I was delighted when he went out of business about 5 years later. And he literally did. It was such a negative attitude.
Yeah.
He didn't even really look at my work. He said, "No, we have too many photographers already. Yeah, pack up and go back to England." But
Wow.
I persevered. But a magazine had just started that you mentioned, Darkroom Photography, had just started in San Francisco. And I called the editor. It's in the days when you could actually call editors and get them on the phone. And I said, I'm a writer from England who also happens to be a photographer. And I was lying because I'd barely written a postcard home. And I certainly hadn't any real proof of being a photographer. But she said, come in and see me and we talk about you possibly doing something for the magazine. And I'd done my homework, as every journalist should, or every freelance should, look at past issues of the magazines, make sure that what you're pitching is appropriate, and make sure that they haven't already covered it. And I'd done my homework, and I said, you have a series every issue called Masters of Photography, but you've never done Ansel Adams. I said, would you be interested in doing that? And she said, yes, I'd love to do that. We've never been able to get him. And I said, if I can get the interview, would he take it? Said, yeah, come back when you've got it. And she said goodbye, never expecting to see me again. I called Ansel that evening. He said, come down whenever you like, interview me, bring a camera, take some photographs of the dark room and everything, which I did. I got a great interview. I got a series of photographs of the dark room, and the editor was delighted and put me on the masthead. and I became a contributing editor. I did a whole series of interviews for the magazine with all the great West Coast photographers, Brett Weston, a whole bunch of people that were still alive in the early 80s. And I thought, this is crazy. I didn't come to the States to be a writer about photography. And interviewing wasn't writing, it was your Q&A stuff. I just transcribed the tapes that I had. So it was relatively easy to do as a so-called writer. And it was always published in interview format, Q&A format. And I thought, I don't want to be doing this. This is not my career projection that I've wanted. I want to be a photographer. So I suggested to the editor that we looked at people behind photography rather than the photographers themselves. And I said, for example, the director of photography at National Geographic. There's a lot of photographers would be interested in that. He said, yeah, that's a great idea. And I called Lillian Davidson, who was the personal assistant to Bob Gilker, who was the legendary director of photography at Geographic, who was impossible to get in to see. And Lillian said, well, I'll ask Mr. Gilker if he'll be prepared to do an interview with you, but don't have any expectations because he's very reluctant to do that. He rarely sees people other than photographers that have been working for him regularly. And 2 weeks later, I got a call from her. He said, well, I'm delighted to tell you Mr. Gilker's agreed to do it. So I'm very surprised because he never normally does that. And so he said, let me know when you make it over to DC. So I immediately booked a flight to DC, went to see him, did this interview with him. I took photographs of him. And I also had a portfolio with me. At the end of the interview, I pulled this portfolio out. I said, and while I'm here, would you mind looking at some of my photographs? Rolls his eyes. The last thing I need to do is look at photographs. That I've got a Rolodex of the world's best photographers here. I don't need to see any more photography, but as you hear, I'll take a look. And I said, I've also got 3 story ideas that I think you may be interested in. And I pitched him these ideas, and he said, well, leave them with me and I'll get back to you, because I never expected to hear a thing. And again, later, I get another call from Lillian Davidson saying, yeah, Mr. Gilk would like to give you an assignment to go to Pakistan. Let us know how much film you want. And I took it from there. The amount of film I wanted was, I thought 50 rolls of film was an incredibly huge amount. I probably hadn't shot that much in my life. I said, 50 rolls would probably be. They said, oh, no, we don't normally give less than 300. I had 300 rolls of film to shoot, which was over a long period, but it's more film than I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And years later, Bob Gilker said, I didn't give you that assignment because I thought you were any good as a photographer. It was because you got through my door. He said, I have one of the most difficult doors to get through, and you did it. And if you can do that, you can handle a geographic assignment. Because, realistically, most of photography is being there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anybody with a camera could get the photograph if they were there. And that's the secret.
Wow. Well, so you went on to you went on to photograph for National Geographic quite a lot. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time going into that, except to say that that is a big, big deal. There are photographers and writers who that's the pinnacle of, you've arrived and you arrived.
You always think that, Terry. It's like getting your first cover.
Yeah.
My first cover for a geographic publication seemed to be the pinnacle,
Yeah.
but it's short-lived.
What
You
was your
realize it
first
isn't.
cover? What was your
Um,
first cover? What
it
was
was
your first?
is a photograph from my home, Marin County, from the top of Mount Tamalpais, looking towards San Francisco,
Wow.
with a family picnicking, so very small in the frame.
Huh?
Um, but working for Geographic is a lot of photography. Well, working for Geographic is different to most publications because of the depth you need in the story. And you have to think as a journalist rather than thinking of just as a photographer shooting single images. You're thinking
Mm-hmm.
as a whole story. And there has to be some meaning to the images. That is different, but there are a lot of photographers that could handle it. It's luck and taking advantage of that luck when it happens. It's lucky that my editor with darkroom photography agreed to me doing the story on people behind photography.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's circumstance, serendipity. So much
Yeah.
of life is purely serendipity. It's like you, Terry, having the incredible fortune to meet me. I
Yeah.
don't think.
Oh, I agree. No, there is, as well, won't spend a lot of time puffing your head up, but as I get to know the writers world, that conference where we met exposed me to a lot of top level writers and photographers, and I'm very grateful for that. I want to go to the next photo,
And
which is
that opportunity is open to anyone.
that's right. That is right.
Literally.
Yeah. A plug for the book passage travel writers and photographers conference is that you are exposed to giants in the world of travel writing and photographer, and they're accessible. You're able to talk to them, develop relationships with them. So if there is somebody listening who wants to write or photograph travel, that's where you need to be. Moving on, sumo wrestlers. What's the story here?
Well, that relates very closely to what I was saying about Bob Gilker's comment about me being able to open doors. I was working on a story for Departures magazine on Tokyo. I spent a month in Tokyo photographing the story. I love Japan. I never refused an opportunity to go back to Japan. It's one of my favorite countries in the world. And it's also one of the strangest. It is so superficially Western, but beneath that very thin veneer, it is bizarre.
Hmm.
And it has so many rituals and bureaucratic things going on under the surface. Japanese will never say no. You'll never get a straight answer. They'll always say maybe, or we'll tell you later, we'll think about it, but never an outright no. And I tried to get into a sumo dojo for 2 weeks through the Sumo Association with no luck whatsoever. They would never tell me I couldn't, but neither would they give me the go ahead. So I gave up and I just went into one eventually. I'm very respectful of Japanese manners and ceremony. I always bow, take my shoes off when it's appropriate. I'm very careful about where I stand, how I relate to people. I'm ultra careful in Japan, and I still upset people sometimes without knowing why, because no one will ever tell you.
Mm.
Uh, but I went into this dojo. I made it clear I was a photographer. I had two cameras with me, and I point to the cameras and smile. I couldn't communicate linguistically, but you can communicate in other ways always. And I was the only foreigner there, inevitably. And I saw them training, and I asked if I could, your sign language, asked if I could take photographs, and they said yes. Looking back on it, probably to be more polite than because I really wanted me to. They're very polite nationality, but I started photographing and got an amazing set of photographs. I probably spent almost a whole day there in this training facility.
Yeah, this is beautiful. The next photo, it is of pilgrims gathering to bathe in the river Ganges. I was really taken by this photograph, mainly because of the different emotions that were evident on the faces. And it led me to do a whole research project. Why were they there? What were they doing? What were their beliefs, etc. But you saw something in this photo. What was it?
A lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, it's one of those shots that are crying out to be taken. I don't remember who I was shooting for. I did a lot of work in India in the 80s, particularly. I spent almost 3 years there on and off in my life, but particularly during the 80s. I've been back to Varanasi several times. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. There's such a depth of culture there. There's so much to see. It's a photographer's dream if you can put up with the crowds. And I was fortunate to be there for Kartik Purnima, which is full moon, when crowds of people come down to bathe in the Ganges. And it was just an obvious photograph to take, just to show the concentration of humanity in that one place at a specific time.
Well, you've said that you want to create photographs that leave the viewer asking questions and images that reveal themselves slowly over time. This does that. This does exactly that. I think it's one of the most arresting photos in Passages. And I really appreciate that. You look for an emotional response to your work and the ability to hit one in the gut. Well, mission accomplished. You did that for me in this. Did it affect you emotionally?
Not at the time, no.
Hmm.
And I think, to be fair, Terry, I think a lot of that emotional response was thanks to my designer, Jenny Barry, who designed the book and is one of the country's great book designers. I met her through the Day in the Life book. She was the original designer of the Day in the Life books for HarperCollins. And she selected that photograph for a double page spread and placed it in a position in the book that would have the maximum impact. And
Well, she did it.
she's brilliant, a
Yeah,
brilliant designer.
yeah,
And I think that's partially the reason you're affected by it in the way you were, as
yeah.
much as the photograph itself.
Well, it's very interesting to me because you sent me 2 photos. One was a larger frame with other aspects to it, and I asked you for the specific one in the book, which was cropped to just be people. She does a great job.
That was Jen's decision. Yeah.
Yeah, she does. That was the right decision. It
No, she
got
was right. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely right.
Mandalay. How'd you get this photo? I understand that people have photographed the heck out of this place, but you got a unique photo.
Yeah, if you look, Google Ubien Bridge in Mandalay, you'll come up with hundreds, if not thousands, of photographs that are all variations on the same theme. They're all sunset photographs of the bridge in silhouette. And I've been there more than once to this bridge over the years, and I wanted to get a photograph that was beyond the cliche. Generally for travel magazines, everyone wants the cliche shots. If you're doing a story on San Francisco, you have to have the Golden Gate Bridge, Coit Tower, Fisherman's Wharf, but you want to go beyond the cliche that everybody gets. And Uben Bridge is one of these places. So I decided I'd shoot it from, not only would I not shoot it at sunset, when there are hundreds of tourists out in boats on the lake, I'd go at dawn when there's no one around. It's even difficult to find a boatman at dawn to take you out on the lake. But I also went on the bridge itself because there are all the locals going to and from work on the bridge. And I found this place where, again, I could smell a photograph. I knew something could happen there. I didn't know what. And I photographed it. I was there for, it could have been an hour. And I found a place on the bridge. I backed to one of the I don't know what you call it, a pillar on the bridge, one of the elements of the bridge. And it's the world's oldest and longest teak bridge. And I just stayed there and I photographed different configurations of people coming across. Now I've got monks coming across, people with bikes. And then the bridge pretty well cleared and a woman came across holding this lunch pail. And I took a photograph of her. Then a second woman came behind her, took another photograph. And I couldn't see this happening because my back was towards them. Then a third woman came, and then I couldn't be, I thought, God, that's great. 3 women. This is absolutely perfect. And then a fourth came along, and I couldn't believe my luck. And that's the shot. I pressed the button and got the shot. It's one of my favorite photographs
It's
because
great.
I like it objectively, but I also like it because of the time I put into getting it and the fact that I was able to capture it. And I managed to get the feet off the ground of 2 or 3 of the women. It just, everything about it worked.
It certainly does. Passages is both your beautiful photography in a memoir. And from what I understand, you were quite a shy boy. Talk a little bit about your childhood and your development as a photographer as we look at this gorgeous Mansfield print.
Yeah, I always have been shy. I'm still shy if I'm dropped into a group of strangers. The strange thing is, I can get up in front of an audience now of several hundred people and talk about things that I know about. But I was at a Christmas party, a member of the Explorers Club, and I was at a Christmas party last weekend, this last Sunday, and there's no one I knew there. And I felt very awkward. I didn't really talk to anyone until a friend arrived. And then it loosened me up a bit, but I'm still basically very shy, particularly with women. I always had a very hard time growing up getting girlfriends because I always found it impossible to approach women that I liked. It's still very difficult because there's always a fear of rejection.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I
It's,
think we all share that.
but my old college roommate didn't. He
Mm.
know he approached every woman on the planet just
Oh my
about
gosh.
with a degree of success. And I was
Uh,
just the opposite. I was painfully shy. I didn't have a girlfriend until I was in my 20s,
huh.
literally.
Was was that about the time that you took this Mansfield photograph?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And I took that I had a very simple camera. I think I was 21. I had a very simple camera. It was an Agfa Silette. It's called an Agfa Silette, which was as simple as you can get for a 35mm camera. I shot it. I was staying at what we called a boarding house, is a lodging in Mansfield, where I was working I just graduated from college and I was working as a town planner. And I took it from my bedroom window one evening.
mm, mm.
And it's still one of my favorite photographs.
Well, so I think back to the talk about being shy. You joined the Boys Brigade, which is sort of a model for Boy Scouts in the United States, basically to bring you out of your shell.
Yeah,
And
my dad was, both my parents were concerned about my shyness because I was an odd kid. Uh, yeah, I'd spend hours in my bedroom painting. I didn't play sports. I was just an oddball. And I'm sure my parents thought I was probably gay because I never had a girlfriend either because I was too shy. It was odd. My dad pushed me into a lot of things. I think a lot of it was things that he wished he'd done when he was younger. He always regretted during the Second World War that he was never posted to India. He was due to be posted to India, and he developed an ulcer, a serious ulcer condition that prevented him from going. So he had to spend the war he was made an officer, but he spent in what's called the pay corps. He had a desk job paying soldiers, basically. And I think he always regretted that. So he always pushed me towards travel. And he saw joining the Boys Brigade as a way to bring me out of my shell. The Boys Brigade is a forerunner of the Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts was modeled on the Boys Brigade originally. And fortunately, the leader of the group I was in was very into outdoor activities. And he used to take us camping and hiking, and I started climbing as a member, and that got me into climbing. I was always interested in photography, but climbing became a passion as well. And eventually the two passions coincided and shaped my life.
so, where else have you climbed then? You went on to climb quite a bit.
Yeah, I climbed all over Britain. I remember when I was in college, one term, winter term, my dad didn't let me take any of my climbing gear back down. I went to University of London, and he wouldn't let me take any of my climbing gear down back with me because he knew if I had it with me, I'd be taking off to the Lake District or North Wales every weekend. And little did he know I had a duplicate set in London.
Oh no.
And fortunately, it's in the days before cell phones.
Yeah.
So there's no way he could keep tabs on me. He had no idea where I was.
Oh
But
my.
Yeah, as a fanatical climber, one year I climbed every weekend of the year.
Wow.
And so I climbed all over Britain. Then I moved to the Alps. I climbed in the Alps extensively, mainly the French Alps. Then I moved to the Himalaya. So I climbed all over the world.
Yeah.
But,
We have a photo of you at Mont Blanc.
yeah, that was in the early days. I climbed
Yeah.
that in my teens the first time, and then went back later. I've climbed Mont Blanc. I've done the traverse of Mont Blanc by different routes 3 times, I think.
So do you think that climbing contributed toward your pull toward photography, or were they sort of the parallel tracks?
They were completely parallel.
Hmm.
The first Himalayan expedition I went on was to the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan. I was on a mountain called Mir Samir, which was immortalized by Eric Newby. Eric Newby, who wrote A Short Walk in the Hindu Kush. And Eric was our advisor for the expedition. Eric was actually happened to be on the faculty at Book Passage one year.
Oh,
He's English, but he came over and spoke at Book Passage. Eric was a great writer, and he advised us on that expedition. And because I was interested in photography, I was made the photographer. But it culminated with a trip to Everest in 1975. At that time, Everest hadn't been climbed by an Englishman. It hadn't been climbed much at all in 75. It had very few ascents. The first ascent was by, of course, Tenzing and Hillary. And Hillary was New Zealander and Tenzing Nepali. So, although it's a British expedition, no Englishman had ever climbed it.
mm,
So, 75 was the first time that it looked as though someone from England would get to the top. And it happened to be my best friend and my best man, who was Doug Scott. Uh, Doug told me they got permission to go to Everest and said if I'd like to come along, just come on, hang out with us, because he knew I'd always wanted to go to that part of the Himalaya. And I ended up going for the London Daily Mail, which was a rag in those days, but not quite the rag it is today. It wasn't the sleaze paper it is as of today, but
mm.
it was still not, certainly wasn't the London Times. But I went out for the Daily Mail. It's the first time I'd done any real photography. It was exciting because I had to get photographs, I had to get film back to London. And of course, this was in the days before the internet, 75. There was no communication between base camp and the outside world at all, apart from runners going back down to Kathmandu.
Yeah.
And I had to get the film out somehow and get the film to Delhi, where it was developed and scanned and cabled to London to be in the newspaper. I got 3 double page spreads in the newspaper.
Wow.
And I think that's the first time that my dad really took it seriously that I wanted to be a photographer.
Interesting. Well, so you were taking various expeditions to places to climb. You were still in your occupation as town planner. You got married, but I'm sure you must have liked planning, but it didn't seem your heart was there. So,
No, I didn't like it.
oh, you didn't like it,
No,
but you have a degree in it.
I had to work for politicians.
Okay,
You know what they're like, Terry.
I do know that. I know that a little too well, unfortunately. Thread this together: a thin skinned county executive, the Queen of England, a divorce, and a subsequent marriage to an American led to propelling you to leave your day job. How did that all happen?
Well, the county I worked for had a chief executive who was a little Napoleon. He had a Napoleon complex,
Yeah, I
not
think I
only
know
in
him.
not only in stature but in
Yeah,
mentality.
yeah.
And he hated being upstaged, particularly by a member of his staff. And the first time it happened was at a Rotary Club meeting when I was giving a talk on the Everest expedition, and he was sat at a lower table with the common herd of Rotary Club members, and I was the guest of honour, and he wasn't entirely happy about that. But then my wife at the time was a BBC producer, and she got me a job covering the Queen's Jubilee tour. I think it's 1977, maybe 76 or 77. Now it's the Queen's Jubilee. It's 77. Is the Queen's Jubilee tour, and I photographed it for the BBC. I was one of 3 photographers to be given what's called a Royal Rota Pass. That's ROTA. And a Royal Rota Pass gives the highest level of clearance there is in England. You have to be interviewed by everybody, MI5, MI6. You're really given a thorough checkout to get permission for one of these passes. And I was literally with the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh for days on end, literally by their side. Yeah, I was standing next to them. And there's one occasion when there's a big event at Nottinghamshire County Council, which is the main council for which I was working. And there's a long receiving line. And Albert Hodder, this chief executive, was at the far end of the line. Then there I am, sort of one of his lesser employees, walking along with the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh. And it was more than he could stand. He was almost beside himself. And he called me in and hauled me over the coals the following week and asked me, I had to decide if I wanted to be a photographer or a planner. And he wasn't pleasant about it. He gave me an ultimatum. Unfortunately, I'd taken leave. He had no authority to question it at all, but it wasn't pleasant. And a couple of years later, I quit. Wow. And my biggest regret was that I quit because I could have offered to be let off for adequate compensation, but I didn't. Oh. It's the story of my life. Wow. There's a missed opportunity. They'd have paid me. They'd have paid me to go. Wow. And I did it voluntarily. How stupid. But so I don't regret it. You've said that decision kind of propelled you into uncharted territory. In what sense? Well, my dad thought I was totally responsible. He grew up during the Depression and the Second World War. He was paranoid about security. He worked the same job all his life and got a cheap gold watch at the end of it. And then he retired when he was 60, spent the rest of his life gardening, and he lived another 30 years. But he came to the States once after I moved here with my mother, and then felt he was too old when he was in his late 60s, which to me is, it's a different generation. You know, Terry, it's a totally different mindset in those days. And I had a secure local government job as a deputy planning officer. I had a reasonable salary for the time. I had a 2% mortgage. I had a free car loan. I had 6 weeks vacation a year, and they would give me time off. Combined, because England has so many public holidays, I could combine it and get 2 months off at a time. Wow. And if I needed to, they'd give me extra leave. For Everest, they gave me an extra week, an extra month off, unpaid. And my dad thought I was crazy giving it up to be a photographer. But I knew I had to do it. Yeah. Well, it wasn't until late, the Everest experience impressed him, I think, the fact that I did it and got national publication in the newspaper. Yeah. But the thing that I think really swayed him was I went to Pakistan with the Royal Geographical Society, and I became very close friends with John Hunt, who was Lord Hunt of Everest, the leader of the 53 Everest expedition. Yeah. And John and I became quite close, and John's wife, Joy. And he would call me when I was with my parents, when I was over from the States with my parents. He'd call, and my dad would answer the phone. And my dad asked him who it was calling. He said, "It's John Hunt here." And my dad was almost beside himself. Oh, wow. He was so impressed that Lord Hunt had been calling his son. Oh, and I think he realized that I'd probably made the right decision. Wow. Well, so you went on to have and still have a very illustrious career, taking photographs for some of the top publications in America. You have a unique way of seeing things.
And I want to go through a couple of photographs that you sent that illustrate that to me. For example, we have the photograph of a horse and a Cuban cowboy.
So you can't see the cowboy. The
Well,
cowboy is implied.
the shadow, yeah. So, I mean, how did you know that was going to happen? How did you
I
see ahead
didn't.
to that?
I
That
didn't.
was serendipity.
That's part of walking around with a blank mind or
Yeah,
an open mind. I
yeah,
shouldn't keep calling it blank, it's open.
yeah,
And it just impressed itself on me. I saw it and took it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's that simple. It's that simple, Terry. And that's what I try and teach when I'm teaching workshops. I'm not teaching people how to take photographs technically. That doesn't interest me. You
yeah,
can learn that from YouTube or camera manuals, whatever. That's the relatively easy part. You have to know that. But the hard part is learning not just to look, but to see and being
mm,
continually attuned to the world in front of you.
yeah,
And that's a perfect example of that, of walking down the street and seeing that, seeing how the light's acting and just recognizing it and knowing how your camera will capture it.
yeah.
Because a camera doesn't see as your eye sees. And you have to learn that. You have to learn to see as a camera sees.
So we also have a photograph, lovely photograph of a woman cooking in a kitchen on a tobacco farm in Cuba. I mean, so many things to
That
ask
is a
about.
more intentional photograph. I wanted to. It's a bit of a cliche. A lot of people have taken that, taking similar photographs of her. Every tour group that goes to that part of Cuba usually goes to that farm and visits her because she's very photogenic and friendly. I must say, I prefer mine to most that I've seen. But it was very intentional. I wanted to show a typical rural Cuban kitchen.
Yeah.
I'm drawn to smoke like a moth to a flame.
Huh.
Smoke and steam, I always feel I can do something with visually. So that was inevitably part of it. I love the light, the soft light coming through that window, which I
Yeah.
call Vermeer lighting. And
Vermeer.
all those elements came together. And
What
then I just worked with her with a cigar until I got the shot that I thought worked the best. And I don't just take a single photograph. The horse with the shadow is a single photograph. There's not
yeah.
much you can do with that.
Yeah.
But the situation of this woman, I spent some time with her and took a series of different photographs until I got what I thought really worked. But I didn't direct her. I didn't impose myself onto the image. I just captured what was happening in front of me. I work best when people are doing their own thing and I'm a fly on the wall and I become invisible.
So that then I guess is an ethical thing for you, that not imposing yourself on the situation,
Well, it's there's always this ethical question of whether you should sneak photographs of people.
right?
This isn't a question of that. She knew I was taking a photograph of her. I was standing next to her with a camera. It was obvious what I was doing. But there are times there's a photograph that is in the book of a man reading a book, a man in a turban reading a book.
Yes. Yes.
That was what you call a sneaked photograph because if he knew I was taking his photograph, it would have destroyed the moment,
Yeah.
totally destroyed the moment. So ethically, I think as long as you let people give them respect and don't ridicule them, the only people I'd ridicule are British or American, and I've done that a few times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I in a third world country or in a lot of places, I wouldn't ridicule people. I'd want to show them, as I say, with respect.
Sure.
And as long as I do that, I personally don't have a problem with it.
So the next photograph, which is a group of monk kids, boys, they were aware of your presence. Did you?
No, they're not all boys. There are
Oh, they're
adult
boys.
monks as well.
Well, yeah, but they're male.
They're male.
Um,
Yeah, they're all
yeah.
men. Yeah, it's a
So
monastery. It's a male monastery.
did they know you were taking those? Did you just kind of
I don't
blur into the
know.
background?
Some of them would. I didn't. I was the only foreigner there. I was one of the first. people to go into Bhutan, the
Mm.
first foreigners to go into Bhutan. I think one of the first 5,000 in the early 80s. And so, yeah, I was literally the only foreigner there at the time. And it was, I obviously stuck out like a sore thumb because I
You
was
probably weren't
white.
wearing red. You had a little bit
I
more
wasn't. I
hair.
wasn't wearing red, but I couldn't escape being a foreigner. I had two or three cameras with me because in the days of film, I always took two or three cameras in case I ran out of film in one of them, and to have
Mm.
different lenses on each camera. So it was obvious what I was doing, and they were very friendly. Bhutan's an easy country.
Yeah.
The other countries not so easy, but Bhutan was. I've been back to Bhutan a couple of times since, and it's a delightful country to work in.
The next photo is really interesting to me. It's at the Wailing Wall in
Yeah.
Jerusalem, and uh, I didn't see the young boy at the bottom at all at first. I was focused on the wall, I was focused on the hats, and then I saw that and I thought, How did he get in there? How did he get in there?"
Yeah, beats the hell out of me. I was hoping you'd tell me, Terry.
No, I
No,
mean,
it's actually this photograph is important on multiple levels. Yeah, I could talk about it, but we talk about the implications of it for ages. Yeah, on one level, I say I walk around with an open mind and let the image impress itself on me. In this instance, it was just the opposite. I was photographing for a book on the 500,000th anniversary of Jerusalem, and one of my assignments was the Western Wall. And I had this preconceived idea of the wall with people in front of it in silhouette.
mm,
And I was fortunate enough to go there when there's a big gathering of Hasidics there, all wearing their black hats and dark clothes. And I could, I pre visualized this shot with all the hats, no faces. But as I mentioned in the Bhutan photograph of the man on the stairs, photographs often need punctuation. They need this point of punctuation. And I thought that I tried several different ways to get punctuation in this shot I was after. I used men holding books and lots of different devices without showing their faces. And then magically, the crowd opened, and this little boy with ringlets hanging down appeared in the midst of all these black clothed men.
mm,
Just pure serendipity. It's the shot I was after and I was working for, but could never have planned. The
mm.
problem now is that it could so easily have been photoshopped,
Yeah, and
easily. Or,
that's what it looks like. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
or,
Wow.
now with all the modern digital technology, there are any number of ways it could have been created.
Sure.
But it was actually a genuine photograph on Kodachrome. And I
Wow.
got a single frame out of 10 rolls of film.
Wow. Wow.
I worked for it. I shot a lot of film to get that shot,
Mm.
but I don't remember taking it.
Huh. Well,
I didn't
so
know about it till I was with David Cohen, who we talked about earlier. I
yeah,
was in his office and I just got the film back, and I was literally going through the frames on Kodachrome, the slides, and I saw it. And what I said, you'd have to bleep out. I just couldn't believe it, and David couldn't believe it either. And of course, it made the book inevitably.
sure. Yeah. Well, so after a certain point in your career, I think when it became evident that travel journalism, travel photography was not going to remain as lucrative or as rewarding as it had been, you made a shift and you went into wine and food.
Well, it's more complicated than that. November the 11th destroyed the international photography business, international travel photography business,
Yeah.
because there was no travel. So if there was no international travel, there was no advertising for it, and magazines live on advertising.
Right.
The editorial content is irrelevant. Publishers would prefer not to have to deal with editorial content and just take the advertising revenue. In reality, it's all about money coming in. And without advertising, the magazines folded. I did the last cover story for Travel Holiday magazine before it folded, but they went down like dominoes. But at the same time, it's a perfect storm for me. Digital photography became established because cameras became so good they could compete with film. So that took away a lot of the work because everybody suddenly became a photographer. Smartphones became capable of taking decent photographs, and I became a single parent, all around the same very short time span. And being a single parent with complete custody of my two girls meant I couldn't leave them.
Mm.
At least when they were young, I became a single parent when they were 10 and 11. They're 16 months apart, so they were very young. And obviously, I couldn't leave them on their own with
Yeah.
a bowl of water and a bowl of food. Uh, I thought about it,
Cat
but
box.
I couldn't bring myself to do it. So the only way I could make a living was by focusing my work on another area of passion that I have, which was food and wine. Particularly food. I love my hobby, which is my meditation, is cooking. I love
Mm,
cooking. I find it very meditative.
mm,
Uh, but that interest sort of led me to wine. I knew a lot about wine and food. And so I started working in the wine industry. And I live, minutes away.
yeah.
I live in what's called the Petaluma Gap, which is a prime Pinot Noir growing area in southern Sonoma. I live in Marin, but
Mhm.
it's still part of the Petaluma Gap, and Petaluma's in Sonoma. I'm half an hour from Napa. On a good day, I'm half an hour from Healdsburg. So it's prime wine country. And I could drop my kids off at school, do a full day's work, and come and pick them up after school. So that's how the transition really started. Jenny Barry, who I'd done a number of books with, referred me to a person that was producing a book called the California Directory of Wine. And for several years, we did 2 or 3 editions of that book. We did a Napa edition, a Sonoma edition, and a Central Coast edition. And we didn't do them all the same year, we'd alternate years. But I did that for 15 years or more, which was great. I illustrated the whole book. I visited a lot of wineries. I got work from the wineries that I was photographing. So again, it's networking, I guess, is what it's about.
Well,
Sort of
you got a
serendipity.
major award for it too. We talked about that earlier too.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's shift and talk about your, I call them the Yoda years. And that would be when you begin passing your craft on to others.
I
That's
thought you
how,
meant when I was old and wrinkled.
no, as I understand it, you've been doing it for a long time.
I've always been old and wrinkled,
Oh,
Terry.
okay. Well, so I really got to know you. I've been at Book Passages for 4 or 5 years now, but when I went to San Francisco with you and your business partner on a day just to kind of experience North Beach and Chinatown and the ferry building, and you have said that as a teacher, what you really want to do is to provide inspiration. You don't focus on shutter speeds and apertures, but that nothing is more important than the ability to see. And that's what I really was there for. And you really gave a present to me. I was there with my cell phone. I don't have a fancy camera. And you were encouraging and you allowed me to see that the eye is the important thing. And I appreciated that.
Absolutely. The ability to take good photographs is dependent upon your vision. Seeing is absolutely paramount. It's without being able to really see, you'll never take the best photographs. You'll take adequate photographs, but they'll never be beyond that.
Well, so despite, the dwindling market for travel photography as a career, do you think there's still room for photographers that want to get in there and follow their dreams? And what do they have to do to get there?
And the irony of the situation these days is that there's never been more possibility for getting your work published, but it's on the web.
Mm,
There are endless opportunities to see your work out there, but there's never been so little money available.
mm.
So there are endless opportunities, but it's increasingly difficult to make money. But having said that, very good friends of mine. In fact, one of them, Bree
Yeah.
Sneller, I
Yes.
believe,
Uh-huh.
whose handle is Bucket List Bree.
Yes.
Bree makes a good six-figure income as a
Yeah.
travel journalist and photographer,
Yes.
but she works incredibly hard. People think being a digital nomad and a blogger is easy, but boy, I've been in the field with Bree, and she just works nonstop. She's in her very early 30s, and she's good, and she provides solid content.
Yeah.
So there's she's been doing it now for well over 10 years. So there are always opportunities there.
I think what that dwindling market has done for me was to cause me to think, why do I do it? Do I do it for money? Do I do it for acknowledgement? Or do I do it for myself? And I think the third, for myself, is the most important thing.
Yeah, I would agree, Terry. Yeah, I would take photographs whether I was being paid or not,
Yeah.
but don't tell my clients that. But yeah, it's my life.
Yeah.
I'm
What's
a
next?
I'm a photographer.
What's next? I mean, you've
We don't know.
done,
We don't know what's in the great beyond.
is there anything that you
While
have
we're
on your list?
uh, well, there's nothing for me really. No, there are very few countries I have a burning desire to visit. There are places I'd like to visit. There's a lot of writing I'd like to do. I love teaching. I'll never stop teaching. That to me is the most satisfying part of what I do. It always has been, but increasingly so.
Yeah. Well, so I wish that you would do this because of the reason why we do this podcast is to encourage other people to step out and do what they've been, for whatever reason, hesitant to do. Look in the camera and talk to that person. And what's your message for them?
Follow your passions. The problem is having a passion. A lot of people are not passionate about anything. So you have to determine what your passion is and then follow that path. That's and don't be afraid of following it. I've always believed in jumping in the deep end. I did with everything in my life, I've jumped in the deep end. I did with climbing, I did with photography in a way, and I certainly did with photography as a profession. I had no experience at all, really, when I started. And then I moved into film, hadn't a clue what I was doing and learned as I went. So never be afraid, but follow your passion in your heart.
Very good advice.
I mean, it's the same with everything, even with friendships.
Yeah,
Don't be afraid to let people know how you feel. I think that's really important.
very good. Where can people follow you and buy passages, Bob?
I have a commerce site shop, an online shop that's lumariaeditions.com, and that has passages available, and I know it works. You might not be able to Google it for some reason, but you can put it in the link in your computer and it will work. I sold a book on it last week. And that has several books of mine, plus a bunch of prints as well, if anyone's interested. That's the best way to get a copy. And you should all rush out and buy several.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for this time that we've spent together, for the advice that you've given to my listeners, and all the photographs that you've taken that have just blessed us, caused us to ask questions. Thank you for your work at Book Passages. You're a good egg.
So are you.